participants who have joined us. And I would like to welcome all. Good afternoon. Welcome to this special roundtable, which is the EV roundtable organized by CII in partnership with iCreate. And my name is Kranti Sambhav. It's displayed on the video as well by TRS. I'm a motoring journalist, and currently I'm leading Times Drive, which is the automotive vertical of Times Network. And I hope everyone. I can't see the numbers right now, but whoever has joined, I hope everyone is as charged as I am for this roundtable. Because if you look at the current discourse, current discussions around EV, if you talk about any conversation, any question, one of the names would pop up, and that because the panel, this whole roundtable, today's roundtable is really special because we have people from the industry, the veterans, the experts, and people who have guided the whole electric mobility movement in India. And that is why I think that next 2 hours are going to be really crucial and very important for anyone who is interested in electric mobility. For example, I am, and I'm really looking forward to understanding the nuances and getting more stories out of this conversation. And so I would let's put this roundtable in the drive mode, and I would request everyone to welcome our special guest, Mr. Deepak Jain, who is the chairman and MD of Lumax Industries, Mr. Naveen Munjal, who is the managing director of Hero Electric. We will be joined by Mr. Chetan Vaini as well. He's co-founder and chairman, Sun Mobility. We have Mr. Vikram Gulati, who is the country head and senior vice president, Toyota Kirloskar Motors. Thank you so much. Mr. Nishant Arya, who is vice chairman, JBM Group. Mr. Jyoti Malhotra, who is managing director of Volvo Cars India. Mr. Anupam Jalot, who is the CEO of iCreate, and Mr. Amit Bhatt, he will be joining us in some time, I guess. So he's executive director, WRI India. And okay, Chetan has joined. Hi, thanks, Chetan, for joining. And Mr. Ravneet Singh Pokela, who is the chief business officer, Arthur Energy. So today's format is not complex, obviously, because we are just going to have a good discussion on the future, the past, present, and the future of electric mobility, and the challenges this industry is facing, especially in India. So first, I'll ask you some questions which I have, and then I'll also invite all the audience who have joined us. If they have some questions in the second half, we'll take those questions. But before we start this Q&A from my side, I would I'd like to invite Mr. Anupam Jaloti, who is the CEO iCreate, to address this panel and also set the context. Mr. Jaloti.
Thank you, Kranti. Totally honored to be starting this session, and thank you all for being here. So I actually didn't have so much to say as some questions to kind of ask of my own, and not as questions to the panel. Kranti, I'm not taking your role over, so don't worry. But I'm thinking that today EV business in India, and probably in a lot of countries, is like a Lego brick business. You buy components, you plug them together, you make the chassis and the mechanicals, but essentially the heart and the lung you import, you plug them in, and off you go. Now, and I'm wondering how long that is going to be the state of affairs, and what needs to happen for India to be able to replicate what happened in internal combustion engines. It might have taken us 25, 30 years to get there, but now more than 95% of cars, vehicles are indigenized, and their stuff is made in India. In EVs, not so. So therefore, iCreate, which is a standalone ecosystem for promoting tech innovation into successful industry. That's where we kind of step in. Just a little one-liner about iCreate. It was set up by the Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, with a very clear vision and mandate for seeing how innovation can actually increase the lot of our people and increase the viability and competitiveness of our industry. So there's nothing theoretical about innovation. There's nothing academic or research based about the innovation here, but it has to serve a greater goal, the good of the people, the good of industry. And so although we are omnivorous, we support all kinds of innovations, but EVs and energy storage are two very big focus areas of ours. And in an attempt to answer this very question, we said that perhaps if we take the low-hanging fruit of two-wheelers and three-wheelers and ignore the much more complex and demanding four-wheelers and beyond, and in two-wheelers and three-wheelers, master some critical subcomponents like the motor and its controllers, the battery management systems, regenerative braking, so that can you do to a humble electric bicycle what Toyota Prius and other cars do to expensive vehicles. So every time you brake, you recover maybe 8 to 15% of the energy that you're wasting. And what might those battery packs look like? Because they might need to be hybrids between cells and capacitors to take that burst of energy. And finally, you're looking at some integrated vehicle intelligence to come into play that are able to talk to the motor controller, to the battery management system, to the energy harvesting system, and make sure that all of them are working at peak efficiency. Now, interestingly, in the automobile space, perhaps embedded systems, microelectronics, programming, firmware, algorithms, they might not be strong suits. But for India, they're not new. India is pretty good at embedded systems, at firmware, software, algorithms, data analytics, ML. And so can iCreate then start this little journey of using India's strengths to create bodies of knowledge, which might translate into 3-4 very specific companies, which would then be able to create these subcomponents. And very briefly, we've had a bit of tangible success, because one of the things that we were worrying about was that most motors are BLDCs, brushless DC motors, which use magnets. And the most powerful magnets need a rare earth called neodymium, and most of the global supplies of that come from China. So willy-nilly, most motors and therefore their controllers need to be imported, and most of the time from China. And if you want independence, because for millions and millions of vehicles, when they start getting converted to electric, not only are we going to demand cells at a voracious rate, we're also going to demand transmission and controllers. So if you truly want to be independent of imports, then you need a motor which doesn't use neodymium. And therefore, iCreate conceived of a magnetless motor program powertrain. Nothing new. I mean, magnetless motors are pretty much standard. They've been around for 200 years, but lightweight, low cost, high torque. So that's the problem we set for ourselves. Thankfully, Sona BLW is a partner, and an Israeli firm, IRP Systems, is a partner, and the three of us are creating such a motor, and we hope to have it ready by the end of this year. And Sona is committed to take it to global manufacturing, starting with 1 million odd per annum. So that is the kind of thing that we see. But at this point, I'll really end my little monologue. And I'd love to hear, Kranti, from the panelists, whether we're actually at all talking sense, or are we, barking up the wrong tree completely, and, we're doing things which don't need to be done.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Jalothe. This is, I guess, the whole conversation cannot be right or wrong right now, because we are in that phase where everyone is looking at this conversation and adding something new, the way you mentioned. But I have, I guess, more or less interacted with all of you, or most of you in on different platforms. But here I would want to start from very basic, and I wanted Mr. Maini to answer my first question. Chetan, what has happened recently? If you look at the whole EV discourse, I'm talking as a journalist. First question, or first point, or the first 2-3 points which come into my mind are like range anxiety, charging time, and charging infrastructure. How do you look at the EV ecosystem right now? Are we reducing it to just 2-3 pointers, or these are still the most important aspects as far as EV ecosystem is concerned?
Kranti, I can't agree more with you. I think the cost, range anxiety, refueling time are very important concerns, and one of the ways, while multiple solutions will coexist, one of the ways we've felt that we can address this in this growing market, especially in 2 and 3 wheelers, is to separate out the batteries with the vehicles. We, with this, can get vehicles to be cost neutral to internal combustion engine vehicles, can get you range that can be pretty much infinite because you can swap in a couple of minutes. And so you address the range anxiety, long refueling time, and upfront cost on this front. You're also changing very few habits for consumers, right? Today, we have stations at petrol bunks, the IOCL petrol bunks, and other places. So as far as they've gone, they've come to the same level to say, okay, we've addressed this concern on this front. And the other important part is that with any new technology, people are always concerned about, what's the life of the battery, what happens after 3 years, 4 years. And they see their mobile phone and they see a drop in capacity, and they kind of correlate that lithium-ion battery with the vehicles. While the vehicle technology is more superior, we still have challenges on that area where the cycle life does drop. And given the higher ambience in India, 45 in the summer, batteries at 45 could have half the life at, say, 25 degrees. So the combination of the higher temperatures, the combination of not being able to have thermal management systems in small form factor vehicles probably cause higher deterioration in life on this area. So for consumers, I think this is one of the ways, right? And it makes a lot more sense in the shared mobility space, right? But while in certain personal mobility areas, having fixed batteries still would make a lot of sense. So you see, I think you have to address this with multiple ways and multiple solutions. But as you start to fast charge, you have a lot of temperature challenges. And so I think you have to, in the stations, you can thermal manage it and do it. So there's a challenge doing it in just a vehicle, especially in a small form factor vehicle, if you're trying to do it less than an hour on this front. So those are some thoughts which I feel could really help the industry, and that's where we've been working on.
Fantastic. Mr. Pukela, I would want to come to you because relatively a newer brand, and what are the challenges you as a new brand and a brand which is entering at this stage, this juncture, you are facing?
So I think I'm assuming this is a broader question, not just pertaining to charging. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, it's a broader question because we're talking about the ecosystem, so that's what I meant. Yeah.
So I think so we've been in business for about 8 years or so, of which about last 3 years we've been in market. Before that was the development phase, and I think there's been a series of different mountains to climb at different points in time. Starting off, we had challenge of just talented people to sort of just put a team together, but that was just seemed like a long time back. It was 6-7 years back. But for the longest time, our challenge was on the supply chain and the vendor ecosystem, because there really wasn't anything out there. And for a young company to build a platform from scratch as we did, other than the tires, there was nothing off the shelves that we use in the Ather vehicle, which means everything had to be designed by us and then manufactured by somebody else. Batteries we do ourselves, we build our own batteries, so that's in-house, but everything else had to be outsourced. And at that point in time, if you turn back the clock about 6, 7, 8 years back, there weren't any sort of enough people there was no expertise. There weren't enough people willing to invest in that business from a component side. I think the only people who partnered with us were either those people who really saw this as the future and where they were willing to invest ahead of the curve, and they saw this as a means to sort of dip their toes in this business and learn as we went along. So a lot of stuff we did, a lot of design work we did was in conjunction with our supplier partners, and we stumbled together and we got up together and we learned together and sort of become a long way from there. But what's happened since that time is that we've learned and we've learned. We've learned on integration and the overall vehicle side. They've learned on the component side, and those very players today are in a place where they are servicing and serving OEMs outside of Ather as well, where the new players coming in, right? So I think as an ecosystem, there's been sort of a movement. So that's one phase of our journey, which is really all the way up to commercialization and commercial production. Right. Once we hit the market, I think the first couple of years was really about awareness. And when I say awareness, I just want to nuance it a bit. When I say awareness, I do not mean that people didn't know what electric vehicles were. Surely they knew. They also knew that electric vehicles are good for the environment. They also knew that electric vehicles were good on the pocket. But clearly, that proposition wasn't enough, because if it was, then we should have been selling in millions by now. Right? But I think it's not about absolute awareness, but the context of awareness,
Sure.
which is how electric vehicles fundamentally are a better technology. Right? It is not about, hey, I just say A versus B, and I just say money here vis-a-vis petrol. It's about
Right.
where the future is, and this is not just in context of the new layers of value like connectivity and dashboard and all that, but even in the traditional parameters on what you would judge a vehicle on, which is vehicle handling, dynamics, braking, acceleration, top speed, all those things that you would judge a traditional vehicle on, even in those parameters area. So I think the last year and a half or so, the transition from just absolute awareness to the fact that this is really an upgrade where the future is, that shift is what's seeing the big tailwinds from now. So what began as a category creation task for us 3 years back is no longer that. People today, we don't have to convince people to buy electric. It's just about, hey, does Ather make sense? Does Hero make sense? Does Okinawa make sense?
Yeah.
That's a different conversation. Right? So I think we sort of crossed a big hump in the last couple of years.
So here I would like to bring Mr. Munjal in this conversation. Mr. Munjal, what Mr. Jalote also was mentioning now, since awareness is there, as Ravneet was saying, if the awareness is there, but one big challenge is the component or manufacturing in India. What kind of roadblocks are you seeing in that sense?
Good afternoon, Kranti. Good afternoon, fellow panelists. It's a pleasure being here today. So we've got, there is a lot of awareness than what there was earlier. So, with this whole news about the PLI scheme, with the FAME policies, first it was FAME 1 and now we've got FAME 2, and then numerous states also pushing it through. So there is a far more awareness than what there was earlier in the game. What's happening is now, what we found earlier was there was a lot of component manufacturers who would just want to put their foot in the door because they don't want to miss their bus in that sense, but not really make those heavy investments which are required for this sector as well. The second factor which was there was a lot of them would actually be comparing it to the current IC industry, which is now a 40-year-old industry. That's a very, very well-established and a mature industry. The supply chain, everything is extremely robust, and that's well established. So there's, the volumes that they've got there are very, very different from what the volumes here are. We're looking at even the smallest of the IC guys being much larger, multiple times fold larger than the entire EV industry put together on an annual basis. So that's the scale of industry that we had. So the challenge was, how do you reach the customer? How do you get a product which is at a price which is viable for the customer, at a volume which is viable for you and for the supplier? And how do you get the supplier, the vendor base, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, how do you get them to invest in sync with you? Because at the end of the day, you can't invest everything on your own. It's just too expensive to do that. You don't have the volumes. Plus, you have to move from an importation to localized content. In a number of cases, as Anupam was also talking about, there are challenges. Whether we look at motors, etc., we really don't have the large volume motors here. For example, right now, when we're looking at batteries, we don't have sufficient battery supply in India. Now, of course, cells are being made somewhere else and the batteries are getting assembled. But with the growth that we've got, with the shift that's happening, there are challenges there. So the way that we would look at, the way I would see this is supply chain will also fall in place. Once the demand is there, so the critical aspect is that of demand creation. Once the market is there, everything else begins to fall in place. Now, a case in point being the e-RIC market, for example, highly unorganized in a lot of ways, very, very diverse. And it's a segment where the market, the ecosystem is really fallen in place, whether it's a replacement of the batteries, it may be lead acid batteries. So there's been no real structures around it. Now, in this category, what you need is the first and foremost is to create that demand. Once you have enough demand in place, it will make sense for Deepak to invest into the machinery for it. It will make far more sense for Chetan to install the swapping stations around the country, because it's a chicken and egg situation. Should they install all the infrastructure first and then wait for the vehicles to come, or should the vehicles come and then the infrastructure will fall in place? So the market is still small. It's growing. We anticipate this market to be a very, very large market going forward, but it's still small. The costs, when you look at from imports versus domestic, the costs do go up. So simply because of the volumes. So those are some of the challenges that we face.
One of the biggest challenge, I would say, as far as manufacturing is concerned. Mr. Jain, I would like to come to you for this. because Mr. Munjal also mentioned about the PLI. So what do you think would be the impact of the recently announced PLI on this specific sector?
So thank you, Kranti, and good afternoon to everyone. Great to be amongst friends and also esteemed customers. I think I'm probably, apart from my friend Nishant, the only one who's in the component space. I think other ones are mostly in the front end or in the vehicle space. So let me try and attempt this question first, just to see a lot has been spoken about the awareness of electric vehicle. And I think fundamental more than awareness for a supply chain to start investing is the belief that will his investment take fruit? Will his investment give him returns? And I think today, I think that's not a question anymore in the supply chain, in the auto ecosystem, that the future, at least in India, is basically electrification. And that's been also very robustly and convincingly been now said by both the center as well as the state governments, right? And I think that gives us an impetus, a confidence to start investing. However, you have to also understand that the auto industry, traditional auto industry, over the last 3 years have actually degrown almost about 30 to 35%, right? And it's been because of multiple regulations. If you were a traditional ICE engine component manufacturer, because of the BS4 to BS6 transition, we had to substantially invest into new age technologies. And I think you're at a pivot point where I think most of the supply chains are questioning, where would they put their money? Where would they allocate the capital? We're going to be just new tech. Even you understand the traditional technologies are going to grow. Indian market is still having very low penetration. So we have to balance the capacities of the existing customer, also follow new tech. And I think even in the electrification, not every component manufacturer would be able to do everything, right? And I think a lot is being talking about towards, new technology. I think Anupam said a great thing that, we need to innovate, co-create, and as an ecosystem, find very innovative, affordable, maybe Indian-centric solutions for that. Now, first and foremost, in the PLI, I think the intent of the PLI is now very clear for the auto industry. It is to promote new age technologies. And I think very clearly, at least the component list is not been, I would say, is out yet. But what I understand that there are certain components which are not necessarily EV agnostic, but there is a particular thrust on localization and to build competencies where I think there could be low-hanging fruits, and it would also give an impetus on reducing the costs. If that happens, right, I think the component industry would readily invest. But I just want to, end this point is that even in a traditionally well-established industry of almost decades, almost 40, 50 years, the ICE engine, industry, the component industry still imports close to around 175,000 crores, 175,000 crores worth of components. So I think the key here would be what kind of competencies, the component industry and the EV industry want to build in India to gain mass at maybe a global scale. And there is definitely vehicle segments like the two-wheelers, which can easily achieve the mass. Three-wheelers, we're already seeing that. And I'm sure it will follow through with the pass cars as well as commercial vehicles.
Yeah, so that's a fantastic point which you raised, because I was about to ask Mr. Gulati. This is what we have been discussing as far as four-wheelers are concerned. With Toyota, pushing for electric vehicles now. So, Mr. Gulati, what do you think? Awareness is there, as Mr. Jain said. Awareness is there. The confidence is there in the manufacturers or component manufacturers. What do you think is? Where do you see car manufacturers today as far as electrification is concerned?
Clearly, I think there is no two ways about it. The shift towards electrification is very, very visible. The speed of electrification is moving fast. We've seen Europe now moving ahead of China this particular year, where the numbers are concerned. I think if you look at it, India, from an Indian perspective, clearly, I think I agree with all the earlier speakers when they say that two-wheelers and three-wheelers is really going to be the early adopters in the Indian space, and it's going to be faster in those segments, simply because of the fact that the dynamics in the Indian market are very different from global markets. Cost competitiveness is, a factor. Consumer acceptance in terms of value proposition and price is very sensitive. And of course, you have the other issues which kind of only magnify the challenge a bit. So I do agree with what was said earlier in terms of having to find our own unique, innovative solutions. And I totally agree with what Chetan, is moving ahead with in terms of battery swapping. And I think it can be a game changer in our context, given the vast, challenges we may see in vast parts of the country. As far as four-wheelers is concerned, I think that the key really is going to be around how you can meet the two challenges. One, of course, is the price difference, and the other is the charging infrastructure. Coming to the first challenge of price difference, currently, we are fortunate that the government is really backing this shift in no uncertain ways. It's like the kind of support it can give. It's all there, whether it's from demand side, whether it's the GST, or whether it's now the supply side incentives. The key really is going to be, in my opinion, making in India, making at global scale and quality, which can help us drive down costs, and of course, innovation, making products which are just rightly suited for our markets, not essentially just replicated from abroad. And to be able to do that, of course, all of these interventions which the government has put in place are going to be critical. But I think one more thing which we are seeing globally everywhere, wherever electrification has taken off and manufacturing has played a role, is the role of aggregation of demand for EV parts, cutting across a segment, cutting across even applications, and also cutting across technologies. Because if you look at the various electrified technologies, which includes the entire spectrum from strong hybrids to EVs, the EV powertrain parts are common, and what you see currently in many countries like France or Germany or Thailand and Indonesia. And I think they've done one more thing which we can replicate, which is carbon-based taxation, which is nothing but fuel efficiency-based taxation, that only kind of pushes the entire ecosystem in a much faster way towards building that scale, building that ecosystem for manufacturing, which can drive down the costs, which can displace ICE much faster. And when I say displace ICE, it will really have to be with all shades of electrification, especially in the four-wheeler space. And that, to my mind, is the key going forward. Because the current rate of taxation that we have today is dependent on factors which are not socially relevant. For example, the ground clearance, how does that matter for God's sake? What output is that giving? Engine size. Okay, I can imagine in four-wheelers, the size of the car, in a way, relates to, let's say, the social desired element of having, addressing fuel efficiency and to some extent the congestion part. But I think we really got to look at this piece of linking the taxation to the carbon emission, which is done globally in many countries. Okay. So that really, in my view, can really speed up the pace of shift.
So we have almost spent like 30 minutes, but I haven't spoken to Mr. Arya. But before that, Mr. Malhotra, I would like to connect the last point what Mr. Gulati made about four-wheeler manufacturers. We have seen the luxury car makers or high-end car makers more confident as far as EV adoption or announcement of EV-only portfolio is concerned. So how different is it for the big or high-end car makers as far as electrification is concerned?
Yeah. First of all, good afternoon, Kranti, and good afternoon to all the panelists. It's, I think, very interesting discussion. I think this is now everyone is talking about EV. So I think let me talk from the perspective of customers first. Then we move on. And we heard a lot about awareness and anxieties. In what we have seen is that in India, specifically, we have moved from awareness to anxiety to curiosity to now I think people are looking for solutions. As a customer, now you go in your own social circle, people are talking about. So they have very clear questions for which we need to provide answers, right? It has come to that stage. As I think Deepak said, from a component manufacturer, that belief has set in. But we need to now give solutions to customers so that their belief goes there. I think that is the key. And when I see it is a combination of few things, and where as you rightly said, from a luxury perspective, probably solutions are, I would say, we have better solutions available now. Also, I think from an entry level, two-wheelers and three-wheelers have. And I think it's the middle where there's the last big volume live, which will take a bit of time, but I think it has to start from somewhere. So what I believe is, I think this, when people are looking for solutions, obviously there are obvious questions about range and anxiety related to that, charging infrastructure related issues. There are issues related to pricing of the car versus ICE. We all know Indian customers are value conscious. I think let's not talk. So they see a lot of value in supporting sustainability, but what is the sweet spot which they are ready to put their money and buy a car? And obviously also we have heard a lot about safety with, I think, all these talks about heat and swapping. So they are concerned how safe an electric car is going to be, because this is something which has yet to come in. People really want to check it out in the Indian context. And then I see people coming and asking about serviceability, life of battery, cost of battery, how and when it is going to be replaced. So these are the questions for which we need to give answers. And then coming to your question, when we look from a luxury perspective, I think we have some answers already. So for example, from a range and anxiety perspective, if we compare to let's say a single car owner customer versus a luxury car owner, probably a luxury car owner has multiple cars. So they have options. So if they are traveling within the city, they can have this car which they can use going up and down. And with now range in luxury cars being talked about more than 400 kilometers, if you are going to use it for a daily commute, even if you live in Delhi and go to Gurgaon every day, almost with a 400 kilometer done for a week in a way, right? And all you need is some sort of home charging solution. And being a privileged customer, they have a dedicated parking space, both at home and maybe at their workplace. And I think that takes care of a lot from there. This solution that we are trying to provide. So home charge, and they are not going to be dependent a lot on the public charging. The second area is within the charging is the retailer charging. So they look forward that the retailers are sort of trying to understand and give them some solutions for this. So I think we have seen now customers ready to take a plunge if we give them this solution. Then in coming to price, we have seen all the state governments and central government has brought in a lot of, whether it is from FAME perspective or from any other perspective, there are, I think now very clear, I would say, signals that government has given something and they are, I think, adding on to it. All we want is continuity. I think that is very important. I think whether it's from a component perspective or as a OE perspective, that we should not have surprises and changes in policies. Whatever has now been announced, investments are being made, keeping that in mind. Plans are being made. You know, in auto industry, it's not easy to change your product plan. It is a long cycle. And I think from I think safety perspective, especially I will say from Volvo perspective, we are very confident that we can provide the right safety solution to our customer and sort of give them. And I think on battery, again, I think it is about the only assurance we can give right now is more from a perspective of battery warranties, that you buy and sort of forget, maybe as long as we can. People, I think we can go up to 6 years, 8 years. If you could do that, if you can provide those sort of solutions, this as a package, I believe luxury car customers have some solutions already.
Right.
And then it is just a question of building traction on this. And I believe, I think that's why you see this traction coming in luxury cars.
Right.
And I'm very confident it will happen.
And that is the biggest challenge, I would say, as far as value for money segment is concerned, because that margin is not there in that segment. The kind of margins or the cushioning we have seen in the high-end, the customers. But Mr. Arya, your segment is kind of different, and the dynamics are also different. How is your industry or your segment, looking at the EV revolution, I would say, and last 2-3 years, what are the changes we've seen?
See, if you look at the FAME II policy, we do talk about numbers, we do talk about allocation, we do talk about multiple things, and I think my fellow co-panelists, all of them have highlighted very important elements which are important for the transition and the growth of the EV sector. So just to add to that, the highest success rate in the FAME II policy till date in terms of the allocation and vis-a-vis the allocation, the outcomes is in electric buses, which also had about 35% of the allocation within FAME II. And out of 7,000 buses, about 5,595 buses were allocated, and now they are getting executed, as we said, a large number has been executed already. So that clearly showcases that per passenger, per kilometer cost is the lowest in case of electric buses. And that is where you are attracting the masses, because in India we have a dearth of public transport being available, which is about less than 0.5 per 1,000 people, 0.5 buses per 1,000 people, which is among the lowest in the world. And all the developing countries are definitely more than 1, and in certain cases going to 1.5. So if we have to do that transition, and we are doing that with electric buses, that is something which can be done very well. And in case of electric buses, the other big benefit which is there is that we can have clear captive infrastructure. Otherwise, parking space, charging space, which is required for multiple other vehicles, every vehicle segment has its own dynamics, which I think Naveen and Mr. Gulati and Mr. Malhotra, everybody would share in their own domains how it's happening and talk more about buses. So in the bus space, we clearly see that the depots which are used for parking have the charging infrastructure, power infrastructure for charging the buses, and that's the reason why there's a very fast turnaround time. And clearly, the vehicles which are being provided are based on comfort, safety, and the kind of luxury a customer is having, and affordability at the end of it, because the operating cost of an electric bus is less than about 40% or 35% of a normal fossil fuel-based bus. So one has to clearly understand what are the dynamics which are really pushing this market. And that's why all key cities across the country, and now FAME II has been focused upon CESL. But we have to clearly understand that any policy subsidies which are there cannot be there for lifetime, and they are just catalysts to kickstart the whole sector for the next few years. And then the sector has to be self-sustainable for it to really grow and scale up. And for that to happen, what is extremely crucial is that how a local supply chain and ecosystem has been developed. So like a company like us, in the last 3 to 4 years, we have developed more than 25 suppliers locally in India, multiple partnerships where we have got them executed for them to go on. Otherwise, there were multiple challenges, and still there are many challenges, because vis-a-vis what we need in certain cases, earlier people were more apprehensive to invest in the ecosystem. And still in different scenarios, what is happening is, which everyone would agree with me, that either they are buying batteries and key aggregates from renowned names like LG, Samsung, Panasonic, and few others, or people would want to do it in-house. So that they are de-risking their complete technology risk in certain cases. And there are other very well-renowned manufacturers whom they're working with. So I think we have to see that how are we creating the LG, Samsungs, Panasonics of India in Indian market for the industry to prosper and grow. And for that to happen, whether we look at it in the battery segment, in the charging segment, in power electronics, a big dearth is there in our country in power electronics and electronics area. So because semiconductor manufacturing is not present, there's a big vacuum around that. So how can we cover that vacuum is going to be instrumental in redefining the Indian manufacturing landscape.
Right. I think it's a good point or juncture where we can request Mr. Jain to comment on this, because this is something which we have been discussing. The headlines mostly are about importing EV components from China. How do we change that scenario in India?
I think you have to first understand why China, right? We talked always about EVs, electronic components, all that. Why China? I mean, it's not because the world has actually affinity towards China, it's because of the competitive ecosystem, which enables them to actually produce globally. And it has been also understood that China over decades have been investing strategically, investing, say consistently in actually building up that ecosystem. I think today we are talking about, I'll give an example, I think Nishant just alluded to semiconductors, right? There's a shortage of semiconductors for which, even globally, as well as India is losing market. And I think supply chains are under tremendous pressure. It's not a demand pressure, it's a supply chain pressure, right? That if there were more semiconductors, we could give more components, there would be more vehicles would be sold and produced. But I think how do we develop the ecosystem and not just the components? I think we'll have to have a very collaborative approach to it. Again, I'm mentioning that we need to find very innovative solutions. It's not necessarily that we do everything which is Make in India, but we need to focus on our competitive strengths. I think, again, in the opening remarks, Anupam actually did allude to the firmware. Currently, India has a massive software strength. We do have good competencies on traditional components. I think that kind of an amalgamation to make a firmware and start basically creating, because as and more electrification models come in and any other future mobility solutions come in, there will be more and more of software which will be included in that. And for that, you need basically, again, components, maybe a lot of electrics. So I think we have to go backtrack. And I think, again, government is actually talking about a lot of back-end, I would say even, allocating demand and kind of basically creating. There's a scale committee which has been actually led by veteran Dr. Pawan Goenka, and he's actually been trying to also create that kind of scale which would make sure that either Indian entities or any foreign entities are able to then invest so that we have a local supply chain. It'll take about 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years, but definitely there has to be a strategic roadmap. It cannot be just on someone's entrepreneurial spirit. Let's say for my company, we have very clearly defined V2X communications where we will be localizing. There are some sensors, but it's not just my entrepreneurial journey that I'm going to take risk and start localizing. It needs to have a structured strategy roadmap, which through a PLI, through certain policy framework, and I think through committees like SCALE, we can probably get the critical mass and the ability to invest.
Okay, Mr. Munjal and Mr. Maini, they have to leave early, I guess. So before we run out of time, Mr. Munjal, one question related to what Mr. Jain was also mentioning. What big challenge and how do you, what's the solution you were looking at when we talk about the components which we don't have to, so that we don't have to import from China?
Again, I come back to the same point which I was mentioning earlier. It's all to do with scale. Once you get certain scales, there's two ways to do it. One is the carrot approach and the other is the stick approach. So what we've used in India is a carrot approach where we are subsidizing from a FAME 2 policy, where we are subsidizing the electric mobility, electric vehicles. The stick from our perspective would more be the fuel price that we've got. So, the fuel price, the gap, the TCO has increased exponentially. Now, what we need, a very important factor that we need is actually long-term goals and long-term policies. We need a cutoff date. We need a date by which to say that, by this time, we should begin to sell only electric and not IC engine as well. And that date should not be very far off. We've been looking at dates of 2047 and 2050 and all that stuff. That's way too far off. In a country like India, we need to accelerate it. Now, case in point here being that if we didn't have last year as a cutoff date for BS4 to BS6 conversion, how many companies would have actually invested into something like that? So here, what we've got is an open-ended policy to say that, yes, we are supporting you for the next couple of years, but when are we really switching over to electric? And once you set that date in place, then everything else begins to fall in place. Then companies can plan their supply chains, they can plan the manufacturing, the infrastructure will fall in place, financing will fall in place, and we will figure out ways. And then you base it on milestone based, that you hit a certain milestone, certain amount of duties kick in. You hit a certain milestone and certain amount of duties kick in, which is where you need to start converting. And that is what, even Deepak was talking about, the PLI schemes, etc., where you have to support the local manufacturing, because to start with, it is going to be more expensive simply because of the volumes. We are very, very small, insignificant in terms of a volume at a global level. There are excess of 20 million units a year. We are just at about 200,000. So we are quite small from that perspective.
Okay. Just one quick reaction from Mr. Gulati, and then I would like to ask Mr. Maini about battery swapping. But Mr. Gulati, what do you think about the timeline or the deadline? What Mr. Munjal mentioned. Do we need to bring it forward? What are your thoughts?
Well, you have to look at it in terms of the trade-offs. It's not a simple equation. Today, if you look at it, I'm quoting the Economic Times in terms of this data. Total contribution of the existing ecosystem, which means the automotive industry and the taxation on the fossil fuels, is 9 trillion rupees per year. I repeat, 9 trillion rupees. We have to find a way that with the transition that happens, of course, I don't disagree with what's being said in terms of having a deadline that's as early as possible. But you've got to also factor in the trade-offs that are evidently there. The unique challenges in our economy. We are not Norway, nor are we, any other Scandinavian country, which doesn't have automotive industry, whose per capita income is huge, doesn't have any other social challenges like we do. You've got to look at all this. And it's not to say that it can't be done, but when you factor in a date, kindly, my only thing would be, let's factor in what are the trade-offs involved. Automotive industry and component industry does not automatically just mean these two. There is a very, very, very strong backward linkage. Forging industry, a large part of that input goes into it. Also think about how do we now create the 9 trillion rupees that are going out, let's say in 10 years or 20 years, from the new ecosystem. Do we kind of, can we model that? Can we envisage that this kind of resource allocation can be met up in the new ecosystem? Because as a country, you can't compromise on resource generation simply because where we are in our developmental stage. Still millions are below the poverty line. So that is one. Second is, I think rather than getting fixated on trying to have a deadline of a go, no go, I think we need to concentrate more on doing what needs to be done right now to make it faster. This is the same argument, I'll just take one more minute. This is the same argument we are facing when Western countries are telling India, take a net zero target, right? And India is saying, look, I'm the only one who's doing maximum for, reducing carbon emissions. Nobody else has done it. And I'm willing to take more challenges, but let's do it now. Let's do it right away. Whatever practically is feasible. Let's not put a challenge which is 20, 30, 40 years away, which nobody will be answerable to. It's the same kind of argument. So I would rather say, let's look at the policies. One policy I mentioned, which I think mirrors what Mr. Naveen is saying, is let's have a taxation on vehicles which is driven by carbon emissions. It's fair, it's transformative, it can speed up this change much faster. But I think we've got to look at the entire equation rather than just looking at one aspect.
Sure. So that's what a trade-off would mean, and how do we get that? How do we fill that gap if we replace it with the new ecosystem? Now, since Mr. Mani he has to leave, I wanted to ask you one question, sir. If we talk about the battery swapping technology or the mechanism, how feasible do you think it is in current scenario, and what do you think is the future? And you think customers would be very comfortable with that? These three, just thoughts I had. I wanted to ask you.
Sure, thanks, Kranti. The focus really was to address the three challenges like we talked about: high cost, range anxiety, long refilling time, right? It's coming from a consumer value proposition on this area, more than saying that there's a technology that is needed on this front. The answer for this is using battery swapping as a technology to look at it. What we're trying to do is create something that could be win-win across the ecosystem. So today, for an end consumer, it's addressed his areas of cost and refueling time. For an OEM, we are able to reduce his development cost by 30-40% and reduce his time to market by 30-40% by having standardized docks. But at the same time, giving the OEM that differentiation that they want, so that the battery is standardized, but there is a piece of hardware and software between the battery and the vehicle that it allows the OEM to get the right regen, the way the status charge looks, the way the all the other features would work would be unique to that vehicle, but still the back end, we use a standardized solution, which allows us to have lower cost of hardware on this area, right? You also at this point are creating a franchise model that helps everyone as in the entire ecosystem. For example, today we have OEM dealers who have stations installed. Now, 5 years from today with electric vehicles, they're going to have less service. So how would they make revenue in the future? If they can be part and make a bit of revenue around the energy ecosystem, it enables them to be part of this, right? We today have 30 odd stations installed at IOCL petrol bunks, which means tomorrow that ecosystem is also able to leverage the new energy area. I think when you start to create solutions that can help the entire ecosystem, you're likely to see a lot more acceptance, a lot more growth. And this is a win for the consumer, a win for the OEM, a win for new players who are coming into this area, and win for the existing dealers and infrastructure players because they get to be part of it, right? More importantly, it does several things for India. So today, for example, with battery swapping, you probably downsize the battery by half, in the case of buses by a factor of 4, right? And because you're temperature controlling it, these batteries typically last 3,000 plus cycles, and typical batteries last maybe 1,000 cycles on this area. So now you've got a 3x better life on the battery, and you've got half the amount of battery because you can swap it around on this area. So you've got around 6x on this area, but of course you keep a little extra batteries in the station, so maybe 5x less batteries, which means for the life cycle, you're importing 5x less lithium on this area, right? And for us as a country, we have to be thinking of how we look at efficiency of use of resources here, right? Similarly, your stations are being used for multiple applications. So the same charger is charging, multiple batteries on this area. So again, it's an efficiency, right? And the last part is about the infrastructure when you want to go at scale, right? To give an example, one of our stations can do 200 swaps a day. So it could feed 200 scooters. Now, if you were to charge 200 scooters a day, that would be a large parking lot to have them all and a lot of chargers. And so you've kind of mimicked a gasoline level of infrastructure. So when a city has to go fully electric and we have 100,000 vehicles, 1 million vehicles and beyond, infrastructure will become a challenge. Not everyone has a charging point in their home or, in their apartment site, right? At the early stages, okay, but let's think of scale. We need to therefore create similar solutions. For example, Bangalore went to LPG 13 years ago, right? There are 84 LPG stations, right? That cater to all the 200,000 LPG autos. Right. To put 100 swapping stations will take 6 months in a city. So you could mimic a new infrastructure in 6 months, right? Which would take you years to create in any other form factor, right? And you're using the same infrastructure for a scooter, for an e-rickshaw, for an e-auto, for a cargo vehicle, all the way to a four-wheeler. So everything that's from, a scooter all the way to something that's, 1.1 tons or 1.2 tons GVW. That part of India is 85% of vehicles produced. So we think of one solution for 85% of the country that really has a huge impact. So I do believe that this can, be a game changer for the industry and for our consumers.
Right. Just one, point which I want to ask. If you talk about the battery shapes, technologies, and everything, do you think the companies need to collaborate more so that it becomes more uniform, so that the whole changeover or swapping becomes easier, charging becomes easier? Because that's what we have seen in the car industry, even the different kind of chargers. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think standardization, we should think of standardization without compromising innovation, because it's at the early stages and the technology is changing so rapidly. So you don't want to put something in a way that compels that, right? The way you think of it is that, there may be multiple sizes, but I would say, let's look at the telephone industry, the early stages, right? You had a micro SIM, a mini SIM, and a regular SIM, right? You had a little adapter and they fit in. As long as they were package protect for OEM. So the OEM says, listen, I have up to this much space, and you did it. There could be slight variations that it allows you to look at it, right? You commonize communication so that it's area. But anyways, you're going to have your own infrastructure player, right? There'll be multiple players. So like you have different telecom operators, or today you have LPG gas cylinders come from multiple players, you would have multiple operators. So when you sign up for your vehicle, you're signing up with an operator too, right? And you may over time change to another operator and therefore change that interface system, right? So you have flexibility. So that way OEMs can use multiple operators, customers could use multiple operators, and the best operators out there will give the best services and they will succeed. And so it's a win-win for everyone. So it's important the early stages. What do we commonize? What do we standardize? Right. Definitely safety, definitely communication, but then ensure that we have innovation that allows us to do it and keep the consumer in the middle of the story whenever we're thinking of something like this, and keep India in the middle of the story.
Very important point. Thank you so much. I think you have to leave, Giovanni. So thank you so much. It's a very valid point. Standardization with. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
With ensuring we don't curtail innovation.
Exactly. That's two. I mean, they're like really important points. Why? Because obviously all the manufacturers, all the products are very different. But at the same time, since this is the initial phase, we can work around.
Yeah, I mean, you see, our own experience, we're today using, we've got like 6 million kilometers, and we use the same battery for a two-wheeler. We use it for one for a two-wheeler, we use two for e-rickshaws. We're three using on autos, and we're using also for load carriers today to deliver to Big Basket, Amazon, the rest of them. Right. It's the same battery can be done on all of them. So it's not that it's technically not possible. It packages and works, and over 10 OEMs are today using these solutions. So it's definitely something that and today there are 50 players in the country working on this. So it's the right time with the right policy to probably trigger this as one more solution. We're not saying it's only this. It has to coexist with regular charging, fast charging, all solutions, right? I think the country needs everything, and for different products, for different applications, different solutions will be chosen that the consumer has the option to look at.
Thank you so much, Giovanni, and we say bye to you, and we welcome Amit Bhatt, who has just joined. Thank you, Amit, for taking time. So I don't know how much discussion have you followed, but we were generally talking about, we have talked about the R&D facilities in India. We have talked about this, the requirement for common standardized battery systems. We have talked about the big buses, electric buses, small two-wheelers, two-wheelers, electric two-wheelers, and the cars. So what I wanted to understand, we have discussed a lot on public transportation also, and electrification. That is what FAME 2 has also kind of focused on. How do you see those incentives working in favor of overall mobility?
Thanks a lot, Kranti, and apologies for joining late. I was having some technical difficulty to log in, but nevertheless, I am online, and I did hear Chetan's very passionate speech. So that is always kind of interesting and insightful. So I think definitely, I mean, if you look at some of the incentives that have come on, one, I think from national level through FAME, but also a lot of state governments have also came in and chipped over and above FAME. And I think that to me is something which has been a kind of game changer of sorts. So especially, I mean, someone who's been tracking and been involved in a Delhi EV policy. So I think this top-up mechanism from the state government is definitely a very welcome step. And I think we need many more states to adopt such progressive policies, because we just can't rely on central government support, but we also have to kind of look at what are the other areas of intervention that can be brought in. So that's one. Second is we also have to look at what can we do beyond just the government support. And I think this is where we need something like a roadmap for the electric mobility transition, because this will require, as some of the earlier speakers said, that this will require a kind of a paradigm change, the entire ecosystem change. And so for the ecosystem change to happen, to me, I think there will be a kind of three phases. First will be the whole support phase, where the state government, the national government have to kind of support the industry to grow for the initial catalytic vehicle segments to come on board. So that's the first phase, which is where we are right now. I think then the second phase is kind of a limited support phase, where you can just provide a limited support. It could be through fiscal instrument, it could be through non-fiscal instruments as well. And this will kind of further accelerate. And I think the last stage is which is a self-propelled phase, where government need not do anything. I think there is enough demand, there is enough supply, and the industry takes care of itself. So I think we have to look at these three phases in totality, and then pick and choose what is it that we can do, especially in the initial phase, because that's where on one side we need supply of the vehicles and the ecosystem, but we also need to have demand. Because if you look at some of the state EV policies, a lot of focus is there on supply, and which is definitely needed, but there is not enough emphasis on how do you create demand. So bridging this together, I think that is what will create a revolution of sort, which is what we expect the EV mobility to do in India.
Mr. Bokela, I want to understand, because on this point, if we elaborate, the incentive has also helped electric two-wheelers a lot. How do you see that in favor of two-wheelers, and what is the blueprint you think should help electric two-wheeler industry?
So I think I agree about I think two big and significant things have happened in the last couple of months. One is the stronger impetus on the central government FAME policy itself, with the increased FAME incentive per kilowatt hour, and then the state sort of jumping in with their top up, which has been super helpful. How this helped really is that from a price and cost perspective, EVs are making sense. Certainly not so much on the four-wheeler and the car side, but certainly on the scooter side, EVs are making a lot of sense on a TCO basis. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on how much you ride. So it was still a TCO map with you having to pay more upfront and recover over a period of time, right? Which financially makes sense, but not many people are sort of, at least a reasonable number of people who won't really up for a higher price tag, right? It's just the way some people approach things, right? Some people look for long term, some short term. But with the pricing changing, now either depending on the policy in which state we're talking about, either the TCO has become like a 1 year, which honestly is a non-issue. In some cases, it's not even a TCO math anymore. It's just upfront. It's almost similar to a ICE vehicle, right? And the moment that happens, which really was also the intent originally of the FAME policy, is to have some a cost neutrality between ICE and petrol. Today in scooters, we are pretty much in that domain, which is why you see this incredible demand that we've seen, right? And so I think the tailwinds that blow today are incredibly strong. And the important thing is that obviously we don't assume this subsidy regime to be there forever. And we in a business model, we don't even assume it's going to be there beyond 2 years or so, right? But with the momentum that we're seeing in the market, with the maturing of the supply chain and the cost coming down from scale and otherwise, from cost getting rationalized, and also importantly, with a 2-3 year run of enough number of people having have a personal experience on electric vehicles and why it makes sense. Therefore, the willingness to pay a premium, when these three come together. So we believe as an industry, after the initial impetus that the subsidies are sort of providing to us, we don't need the crutches of subsidy forever. Because in 3 years' time, I think we should be in a stage. Sure, there'll be a blip when subsidy goes away. There'll be some dip, but that dip is not something that will kill us. I think it'll just be a short-term, maybe 2-3 quarter deal before things bounce back and all that. And so you should sort of pick up from there. So today, I think one big open piece till quite recently was is that predictability in policy. Policy is great, right? But if you don't know, if you don't have predictability, how do you make the deep investments? Today, at least we have a line of sight on a bunch of things, whether it's PLI, whether it's the state subsidy, whether it's the FAME subsidy. It just allows you to take a longer term decision as opposed to living from quarter to quarter or year to year, right? So I think it's a great sort of development last few weeks.
I think this industry also, is of that nature where you need to have consistent plus longer period blueprint. And Nishant, I wanted to understand, Mr. Iyer, two-wheelers, the impact on two-wheelers is different, but what is the impact of FAME 2 or this kind of incentive on the four-wheeler, on the buses and big vehicles? How do you see that nationally? And you think just like different states announcing, like I think 4-5 states have very clear-cut EV policy. You think nationally all the states should be forthcoming and they should announce their EV policies as soon as possible?
No, I think definitely that's there. So more than 13 states actually already have EV policies in place. And if you'd see that, if I just take example of few states like Gujarat or Maharashtra or Karnataka, so there they have actually, in case of buses given out very clear-cut policies, and if we total all the policies up, we see upwards of about 50,000 buses which they are looking at over a period of time, and that gives really good growth prospects to the bus sector. And along with the focus on charging infrastructure, I think that also addresses any kind of range anxiety issues for intercity buses, because for city buses depots are there, but for intercity buses the charging infra becomes extremely important and instrumental in defining the segment. At the same time, we also try and understand is that different states have subsidized the power tariffs also for electric vehicles, and with subsidized power tariffs, charging infra and the vehicles, we see a very positive total cost of ownership, because the EV segment's competitiveness is driven not by the vehicle pricing alone, but the total cost of ownership, which covers each and every aspect, since the maintenance costs and the operating costs are much lower. On the other hand, in multiple policies, what we have also seen is that they have talked about the skill development part of it, which is equally essential, because on the skill, the reskilling, upskilling, and the skilling of people who are not there in the sector, because on one end we have a challenge of unemployability, and on the other hand we have a dearth of people in the EV segment. So that's why, whether from the automotive segment, from railway, from defense, from high voltage, from renewable, from power, and many other sectors, people are coming into this area, and a lot of people from the software background as well. So we need to clearly see that how people across all different kind of roles, whether we see in engineering, design, and development, or we look at the blue collar manpower, or we look at the special SME subject matter experts, all will be very essential in really taking this sector forward. On the other hand, what is equally important is when we are able to set this up, are we getting students who are actually studying and understanding the electric vehicle from different universities and setups? So what I have seen is like IIT Delhi and few other institutions across the country have actually come up with dedicated programs, and organizations and OEMs like us are partnering with them for these programs, for really seeing that people are having on-the-job training prior to them coming out of the university, so that they are able to really start delivering value from day one for all different organizations. So I think these steps are extremely essential. On the other hand, what is important, which I'm seeing, is that priority lending status has to be given to the EV segment for the funding and for creating sustainable business models. I heard few colleagues talking about carbon credits, but AQI, Air Quality Index, or tradable carbon credits, and many other different forms of green bonds are being used for funding this segment across the world. And such new instruments are coming to India. So creating a bouquet of all such instruments is what would redefine the way it was done. Because a big reason for the automotive sector to take off was not only localization and the OEMs bringing the right products, but also the financing being available. As earlier people were buying vehicles on their own, and today majority of the vehicles are financed and sold to different consumers. So that has become a way of life, and that exactly would be redefining how the sector operates, and clearly seeing that how different kind of service models, whether we see manufacturing as a service, charging as a service, software as a service, such kind of models would also emerge, and where players would clearly see that it's a more service-oriented activity where the end customer may not want to buy, because ownership of vehicle has also changed, and mobility as a service covers, encompasses all these areas. So one has to understand that how are we giving that kind of comfort to the end customer with all these models in place, for them to look at the EV segment not as a need, but as a choice which they make, not as a necessity, but as an option they are choosing when they are going into this area, and clearly redefining the industry dynamics. Because if I just compare one thing, just giving an example of electric bus versus a diesel bus, today we see a 12-meter bus at about 2.5 liters per kilometer. So about 40 rupees per kilometer is the fuel cost of a diesel 12-meter bus, which we see. Vis-a-vis about 7 to 8 rupees per kilometer is the fuel cost of electric bus, a same 12-meter bus. So about 5 times is what the difference we are referring to here, which makes clear business sense for anybody to deploy such kind of vehicles.
So
and
just,
as the scale is going up, already the costs are going down.
Sorry, I just wanted to bring Mr. Jain in this conversation, because you raised a very important point. We have talked about the charging station, charging network, incentives and the efforts everyone is making. But you also mentioned that the supply chain needs skilled professionals because this is a new kind of field, and we need skilled people in that as well. So how do you see, Mr. Jain, your workforce, your experts, people on the assembly line, how are they changing? How do you see that?
So, Kranti, I'll pick up the thread which Nishant just spoke about, and I think spoke in a very holistic manner on the complete ecosystem. Clearly, supply chain would be ready when there is a lot more demand generation. I think whatever I've heard of all the players in various segments, there is a government intent to actually facilitate this sector, as well as I think many innovative solutions are coming in to actually start generating demand. Now, in that demand generation process, the supply chain will never become a traditional supply chain, like only component manufacturers. We will have to also transform ourselves, maybe structurally, to be more inclusive and actually maybe deal with startups, deal with academia, deal with organizations like iCreate, deal with software players, and make it more inclusive as an ecosystem so that we are more competitive and we are able to bring costs down. I think that would be the fundamentals of the supply chain. 40 years ago, when I think the auto industry in India started basically generating with Maruti Suzuki, Hero Honda at that time coming in, I think clearly at that point of time, there was a collaborative model. The local manufacturers and the OEMs made collaborations, worldwide collaborations, and it was built to print. But I think today, in this sector, in this transformational journey, the supply chains will have to play a very different role than a traditional supply chain. We will have to start innovating the skill development. Today also the skill development is a challenge. So we are talking about exports, we're talking about quality, but I think the value creation, what this sector would do, will need a very different skill set on automation, on electrification, on electronification. And I think that's a continuous approach which we'll have to partner in academia. We currently do that, fantastically. Associations like ACMA have their own center of excellence with actually, with probably 5 or 6 academia partners to actually ensure that there is competencies which are built in. But I think I just want to say is demand generation. I think all the OEM manufacturers, the vehicle manufacturers, the state and the center is looking into. But I think as supply chains, we'll have to also put out a new hat and become more inclusive and start seeing not as a traditional component manufacturer, but also as all players in the ecosystem, maybe the service players as well, which actually will be feeding into the sector at the back end.
Mr. Malhotra, I would like to come to you for a point where we're seeing new products. What kind of changes, back-end changes, you are anticipating and you have seen in this industry happening?
Yeah, so I think with the changing towards EVs, there is a disruption happening. I think we can hear it and I think we can observe it all around. So there are going to be multiple things which will change. Obviously, the starting point is that we need to skill people on the floor. As I spoke earlier, one of the key questions which we have to address as a solution to customer is serviceability. Whether these cars will be serviced and how they will be serviced. So skilling people is the one part. But the other aspect is that cars are becoming more and more connected, and with EVs we will see. So I think, as Deepak said, I think this is cars will start to offer. They're becoming like mobile phones. They will be very personalized. Each car probably will have to generate can become a very different personalized vehicle for each individual. So with that in mind, I think there will be a new way this whole sort of industry will get structured. That's right. I look at it and probably this is something which will happen around us, that because we will be catering to a new set of customers, people who are environmentally conscious, maybe more younger generation would be the ones who will sort of come forward, and we have to then sort of serve it in their own way. I think we will move towards more online with technologies becoming clearer, and I think a lot of new technologies coming in. How can we, because in our industry hasn't changed for a very long period. If you really see the retailer OE structure, it has been there for ages.
Right.
It's going to undergo a change because purely from a customer expectation perspective, and we have to structure ourselves in a way that we have to redefine the role which OE will play and the role which a retailer will play in serving our customers. And EVs is an opportunity which will, I think this disruption will start with EVs, and maybe tomorrow we are also talking about autonomous drive and a lot more. And it's just a shift which will happen. And backend, as you said, I think we have to ensure that we are ready for these changes and addressing the requirement of this new age customer. And I think in my view, customers, I think the doubts are in our minds. That's what I see. Whether it is us as a OEs or there are, let's say, retailers. I think since this is a disruption, we have to go in with some bold ways and ensure that we are able to create belief in all stakeholders, whether it is the frontline person who is going to talk to a customer and convince him, how we can change that, can that conversation shift in a different way using AI and a lot of other technologies which are going to come in, addressing this through a digital way, and all these are going to happen. And we need to ensure that EV is not just a new type of sort of a power generator. It's a new way these industry is going to get structured. I think all across, whether it's from a supply chain perspective or a demand perspective, we have to all address it in a different way. Let me give you an example of Ola. I think the way what we have seen in a day, what can happen. So, and it is completely online, and how we can sort of learn from that, how this new generation of customers can sort of become and propel this whole industry. Imagine, I think, let's say I'm just taking Ola as an example, but let's say if 100,000 customers were to buy a Ola scooter, that is what we heard in a day, which means 100,000 households will probably have a EV vehicle at their home, and they will find some charging solution, right? And people around them, the families will suddenly realize it is possible. If let's say a teenager in our home can manage a two-wheeler charging with a 40-kilometer range, I think I can manage with a 200-kilometer range car also. And I think this will propel. And how do we address that as OEs to reach out to customer, and I think make it more and more stronger will make a big difference. And I think it has to be done in a very collaborative way. And at backend, I think we are preparing for that shift and that change, preparing ourselves, or retailers, our, I would say, even call center, our, let's say, our websites, everything has to get restructured to address to this new generation customer.
So we need to get ready for that, and a very collaborative way is the way forward. Anupam, you have been listening to the panelists, and you have mentioned the kind of collaborations we have seen on your part from iCreate. You want to take the conversation further? You had a few points, a few questions to ask from the panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Kranti. I mean, the fascinating discussion. I really picked up on some very interesting thoughts like aggregation of demand, and that the supply chain really needs to mature, but the supply chain will follow if the demand is there. And I again had a slightly different take on it, and I say that Vasudevaya Kutumbakam. So the demand is already there. Why must demand only come from India? If the subcomponents we create are quality and price competitive, then the world is my oyster. And today we have sufficient demand to be a very profitable subcomponent manufacturer. And therefore, if in year 2021 end, we are not able to harness the sharpest minds to create the best solutions, technically and price point wise, then we're probably not getting our act together. And that, I think, is the singular point that iCreate is hoping to drive. Even if we do one or two, not all three, four, but world class at price points which are India class. I mean, India has a magical ability to beat price points. and we put that to use and we create subcomponents and then we take them to the world. So then my question would probably be more around just this fact that should some very interesting technologies be developed, would my fellow panelists see the excitement in taking it global? Perhaps Mr. Malhotra, perhaps Amit, Nishant, your firms operate globally. What's your take on it? What do you think about this?
So I think let me come here. Obviously, there is a lot of excitement now, and the scale which India can offer, there is a clear possibilities of India becoming a global hub, and we have to take the lead now. And yes, because I think what is required reality is that it's very difficult to have an export only structure here. So we need to ensure that there is enough demand locally that can then propel that we also sort of add on exports to it. And for that, I think a lot needs to be done in terms of supporting the industry to ensure that, especially for our segment, I think the demand for overall, it's not about ICE or it is about EV, but the way the luxury cars can contribute to overall taxation and overall development of the industry. And I think sometimes when I look back and compare, let's say if you were to compare our market size of luxury cars with smaller countries like Malaysia and Thailand, we are nowhere. And what is it that is driving? And as I said, our belief is I think luxury can propel EVs in a very big way. And if government can look at how we can, and it is going to support everyone. See, if we are going to set up whether the journey has to start like this, it's going to be initially a CKD. Okay, we can set up a CKD shop here and start from there, invest in building EVs here in India, maybe start getting our supplies for components locally if possible. There are suppliers. Once we do that, some of those things can also be then scaled up and become our global players across. And the scale needs to be then built up from there. So I think it is important that for any, especially any multinational to set up in India to also ensure that we also export, the local demand or local market size has to be substantial, so that then exports get added to it. And it can be a very good way that I think the PLI, for example, is a fantastic thing which is propelling and I think making us think of on those lines. But there is a lot more that can be done with regard to sort of initially supporting OEs who have global footprint in terms of let's say there's a lot of debate recently, for example, custom duties and all being highest in India on cars. So if there is a CKD operation of ICE or a CKD operation of EV, it is considered to be same. Can we think of offering a like to like? If there is a CKD operation of ICE and a CKD on EV, can we have a better custom duties on CKD so that at least we start with a CKD operation, and you will see from there it will move to become a manufacturing hub. But it has to start from somewhere. And I think initially to bring in this sort of investment, it is important that we have a CKD EVs being supported with better taxation, better custom duties. That will make a big difference for companies like us.
I see the point. Actually, I see Ravneet's outfit come out from nowhere and become, if not a very serious player, but definitely a strong challenger to the status quo in the entire two-wheeler ecosystem. And you see global activity happening that in EV, it may not necessarily be a gigantic mega factory which is taking things to the frontier. It could be micro factories, it could be challenger organizations. And so when you look at the subcomponents that go into an EV, they're seldom so mind-bogglingly capital intensive and skill intensive. They're very skill intensive, but smaller, nimbler companies can simply startup and be enormously disruptive. So perhaps, Ravneet, I understand you guys are very, very possessive about your BMSs and your batteries because that's your secret sauce. You've also worked on your own power plants, power trains. But a lot of things were said about the entire ecosystem. And the entire ecosystem is not just the motor or the controller or the battery or the BMS. So there's a lot of circuits that go into one of the ecosystem elements. In India, we've got 10, 12 very nice PCB manufacturing circuit assembly shops. But like somebody was mentioning, we just don't have the scale and slickness of a Chinese market. Perhaps it was Mr. Jain who made that point. But there's nothing stopping India in doing that. The chips are imported even by China. The chips would be imported even by India. Everything else can be done right here. And we have innovators who can create multiple variants of a particular circuit. Let me give you the example of a very humble DC-DC buck boost converter. So any DC voltage at any power rating can be converted into any other DC voltage. A very humble device, a brainless device. And it's like a consumable. We need people who are making these consumables in India all the time. We need people who are capable of making vast quantities of controllers that you might have designed in your place. We need a vast number of designers who are capable of creating better controllers. It's not one man's or one woman's journey to increase efficiency. And what iCreate is really hoping to push is a 25% increase in efficiency of electric 2- and 3-wheelers by simply allowing a battery to just discharge a bit more, charge a bit more, harvest some energy when it's being braked, to have a slightly more efficient controller, a more efficient and a lighter motor. You add all of those together and you suddenly get maybe 20-25% upside in efficiencies. Now, those are the kind of components. What do you say, Ravneet? Do they even look attractive, or do they look like pies in the sky and should be left out?
Yeah, the reason anybody is possessive about any IP that they have is fundamentally is really what you're looking at is what gives you competitive advantage, and that usually is really the front end integration that eventually impacts consumer experience. Now, nobody's possessive about which chips and all that, as long as, because that's a commodity. Is how you put it together into a component, which in turn integrates with other components, which in turn makes a vehicle which the customer rides. That's where differentiation lies. Where consumer market is, right? We don't build for sake of technology. We build to answer a consumer need. Now, if consolidation, etc., people coming together, newer solutions, help us build what we want to build eventually. Because all this, what you describe here, means to an end. It's not an end in itself for us. For a component supply, it's an end in itself. For us, it's not, right? Honestly, if there is a better, easier solution, why not? The only question we have, actually, two things I'll talk about, right? One is that I think Deepak mentioned is that the reason China does what it does is not because they have like some deep secret that nobody else knows. It's just that there is a long-term, thought-through, concerted strategy. And it's not about people's individual entrepreneurial journeys and their initiative that they've taken. Right? So there's a method of the madness, there's a framework, there is policy, there is guideline underpinning that, and there's a long-term strategy that you're sort of building towards. Right? That's one aspect. The other one is if I for somebody in my shoes, if I had 1 rupee for every time I heard about a new battery breakthrough, I'd be a really, really rich man, because every second day there's a new breakthrough. Right? Reality is that. When you're looking at, this is a hardware business. If I have to transition from, let's say, a motor A to motor B, or a cell A to cell B, or something else, the design, development, validation cycles are fairly long, and then hit the market. Now you do that, but you do want supply chain predictability. I can't go to a new, on the promise of something great, move to a new partner, a new supplier, whose product in itself is fine, but can't scale at quality with the quality that we need, can't scale at the pace that we need, right? So those are the things that, those risks that deter people like us to try something new. So you can try in bits and bobs, you can de-risk your operation, try a small batch and all that. And therefore, what you look at is when you're looking at your partner is not just the product itself, but the stability, the financial might, where they come from, what future that they have, and all that. Because God forbid, I'm moving to a new sort of motor and new controller, which may be super efficient or very great, but if the guy can't scale with me, like where does that leave me, right? I can't make the changes. So those are the things. Those are practical considerations. Because I always wondered, like, if there's so many good products technically that exist, right? Why aren't they commercialized? It's the risk that they come with. And if you find ways to de-risk that, like, we're talking about, on the one side, demand creation from a consumer perspective, but the PLI scheme, etc., where if you can find ways and means to inject stability in that side, where, listen, if I have a good product, which I know is great for the ecosystem, and if from the perspective of an OEM who would become my customer, if you can de-risk me, if you can ensure that I won't go under just because I don't have money in the short term, suddenly that impetus we provide to that end of the supply chain eventually helps the entire ecosystem. Right? I think it's a little iffy at this point in time. So if you let's say I'm an individual, I'm a startup, I have a great sort of solution. If I have the backing of a VC or a large sort of a component supplier who backs me, fine. If not, then really I'm looking at somebody taking a risk with me, and these are not small risks to take. Right?
Yeah, I think that's very, very well articulated, but it ties me neatly into my next question, and perhaps yourself or Amit, anybody might choose to answer that. Is what's the role of collaboration here in developing? So everybody benefits with a better ecosystem, with a better supply chain. Everybody benefits really. And as you so rightly pointed out, the risk of a half-cooked solution are also phenomenal. And therefore, does it make sense for collaboration to support innovation? Because perhaps the time has come when India can take the torchlight to the rest of the world and say, look, use our technology. It's pretty good.
Absolutely. And I think collaboration is probably the most important component, ingredient to the overall success. And I think collaboration is not only kind of looking at how can we collaborate, let us say globally or internally. Collaboration for me is also between the various actors of the ecosystem, right? So for example, if you look at the way things are happening, a lot of great kind of innovations are happening, but a lot of it is because of this existing siloed approach we have. So some states are doing something good, the rest of the states are not doing that great. Similarly, some departments are taking leadership, but not as a whole, we are kind of moving forward. So the question was that how do we kind of break this siloed approach, and how can we kind of address this whole issue in a slightly more holistic and coordinated manner? And so that was one. And second was, who will then take the leadership in bringing the multiple actors together? I think that's also important questions. And so one of the things that we did recently, last month, is that we actually partnered with Niti Aayog, and we created this forum called Forum for Decarbonizing Transport. And the idea of creating this forum was that a lot of times the conversation either happens within public agencies, or a lot of private conversation happens between private sector players, whether it's OEMs or technology providers and so on and so forth. So can we create a forum where we can bring all these actors together so that we can discuss, deliberate, and move in a slightly more coordinated manner? So with that objective in mind, and we thought no better organization than Niti Aayog to play this coordination role, especially at a national level. So we launched this Forum for Decarbonizing Transport. And what this forum will do is that it will meet on a periodic basis, bringing in various stakeholders together, listening what are the challenges and issues they are facing, and then how we can, as a collective group, address some of these challenges. So the next meeting will probably happen somewhere, probably in November, December, and I'll probably extend invitation to everyone to join, because that's a slightly high-level convening that we want to facilitate, so that we can address some of these challenges in a slightly more coordinated manner. But absolutely, unless we are coordinated, a lot of this will not get the scale as we desire for the nation and industry as a whole.
Yeah, thanks. And it's lovely, this Forum for Decarbonization of Transport. I really love to know more about it. But I wanted to bring you to a singular leap of faith that we took by launching something called Evangelize. And that's an EV challenge, which says that we would like to call upon innovators across the country, investors across the country, industry, and academia, research, and the government to throw up whatever is the most important and the best in the country at the moment. And this is something that we plan to run year after year after year. Focusing again very hard on specific subcomponents, motors, controllers, battery management systems, hybrid energy storage systems, and energy recovery systems. Now, we see this path going up to synergizing on electronics. So why must there be multiple processors talking to each other? Why can't you have a dedicated chip and then a board for the entire vehicle? So your own designed processor that optimizes for various conditions, your motor controller and your battery controller. Now, these are things that really need to talk intimately to each other if you're going to liberate synergies. So it's like a chip for Indian driving conditions, integrated motherboard which has the power electronics. Now, I know that there is need for differentiation to get competitive advantage, but I also know that unless some hardcore breakthroughs like these are done, we're going to be very dependent on importing. And my question then remains is that how does industry really see challenges like this? Does it take it seriously? Because we know with a very, very quiet confidence that these innovations can rapidly climb up the TRL level, the technology readiness level, and reach level 7, level 8, perhaps in a matter of 24 months max. And suddenly there you are then at a point where either you get invested in and you become a big company yourself, or you partner with an existing company and they help you become big, or heaven forbid, some global investor comes and snaps you up, which is something which may not really be the best possible outcome. So you have some thoughts on it, Ravneet, Amit?
So yeah, I won't comment on the technical feasibility, but I think the idea, if actually, I'll sort of in many ways repeat what I just said. These are means to an end for us. If there is way to drive more efficiency in the ecosystem, if there are ways and means to commonize components such that they allow us to still differentiate on the front end, then what's not to like, right? Because you've got consolidation of demand because you're aggregating, because you're commonizing, which means you're buying efficiencies, supply chain, scale up faster. People can, supply chain can invest more because there is higher volume because it is commonized stuff. And because you commonize, it becomes quote unquote a product. Then, moment there's a product upgrade, everybody benefits from the same upgrade, which is what happens in the software industry, right? When you buy into a product, any upgrade impacts like, millions of customers across because it's the same upgrade, right? As opposed to, which is the classic build versus buy dilemma that people sort of work with, right? In many ways, if it's not, a bespoke component, then, if it's commonized, then I do have the benefit of any breakthrough that happens on the platform that automatically accrues to me as well. As long as it just allows me the elbow space in the front end to deliver what the customer eventually is paying for, because the customer is paying for an experience, not for a component. Right? And if that happy balance can be achieved, then I think it's a brilliant solution. Like absolutely, why not?
Nice. I'm glad you see that because again, it's very important to see whether the real user, which is you, really sees the benefit in what we are up to. So. Kranti, we have some questions from the audience. How do you suggest we go about taking that?
I was going through those questions also, only pretty interesting. A few are raising those points which we have already discussed. For example, someone is asking, that's in the proper Hindi. Bin Ivar Kilo. Okay, so Mr. Chandranath Trivedi, he is asking if we can have a proper deadline for different EVs, different kind of EVs. What do you think, Manupam or Ravneet or Amit? Yeah, so that's, I mean, he has like few more questions in case you want to address. Amit, you think some deadline is, I mean, also I don't know if you were there when Mr. Munjal had also mentioned about deadline for the EVs, but he also said that maybe we could have different stages, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, different deadlines for them. So what do you think, do we need to, bring it forward, the deadline for EVs, Amit?
Yeah, absolutely, Kranti. And I think if you look at the way some of these countries have reached the EV levels, a lot of it has happened because there was a kind of definite kind of transition mandate. So ZEV mandates, as we have seen in the US and the other countries, that has really worked. However, if you look at some of the policies, these are really not mandates. This is basically a kind of statement of intent. Let's say 25% of all registered vehicle by 2025 will be EV. So that's a statement of intent. That's not really a mandate. And if you look at historically, we have not seen too much mandates coming from the government. The mandates have mostly come from the courts. So either it is BS4, BS6 mandate or the CNG mandate in Delhi. So while mandate is great and we should have it, but I'm still skeptical if we'll get it from the government side because of various reasons. But unless the judiciary intervenes and provides mandate, it will be difficult, but I'm all for having some kind of mandates for transitioning to zero emission vehicles.
Any thoughts, Anupam, Ravneet?
Yeah, you go first, Ravneet.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to have it's always easy to have a goal to work towards. Right? Open-endedness usually then it relies on people's own initiative. And it's never easy, especially when you have to you're looking at making investments and all that. It just helps if there is a sense of there is something definite that you're working towards. Now it doesn't necessarily mean that we take a deadline which is super aggressive, which disrupts everything we're doing. But if you give the industry enough time, like today we're sitting in 2021, if you're saying that listen, 100% of scooters have to be electric in like 9 years' time. There's enough time for people to make the transition, develop platforms, look at the business model. It doesn't have to be 100, it can be 80%, 70%. So the bigger question isn't, like if you take this example, the bigger question isn't whether you're looking 100, 80 or 70%. It's about, is there a definite timeline I'm working towards and working backwards from? Otherwise, it's present continuous, somebody's working, somebody's not working, you make an announcement, then you wait to see whether the market develops or not. It doesn't really help anybody. See, if you've taken a decision as a nation that we have to go electric, which we have, right? Every policy, every intent sort of states that, then we're just looking at ways and means to ensure that, whatever, for whatever reason, unintentionally otherwise, whoever's sitting on the fence is tipped over, right? And just start making investments upfront. So I'm a fan of deadlines, but but allowing industry enough time to make the transition, because it's not that right now we're in a crisis situation that 2 years, 3 years you have to transition. We still have time, but but equally deadline can't be like 40 years, which means that there is no deadline. So.
Right. So a proper blueprint, a proper vision, but not like immediate knee-jerk kind of reaction. Mr. Malhotra, there's deadlines voluntary also. If we look at all of a sudden, all three German car manufacturers, they announced 2025, 2023. Even Volvo has that kind of plan. So that deadline is very important as far as you are concerned. What do you think?
Exactly. I think, see, as you rightly said, for us, we have now announced that by 2025, we will be selling 50% of all cars will be fully electric. And by 2030, we will sell only electric cars. And I think this is a similar thing from, let's say, coming from government in terms of a clear, there are, as we said, we have heard about the statements of intent, but some sort of a mission statement or a vision that, okay, this is what we really want to achieve. And then as a nation, we all try and I think move towards that. And all the energies and all resources are then sort of put behind that sort of mission. So I think it is not necessary that we need to have a mandatory deadline, but a clear ambition plan, whatever we want to call it. There could be different names, but to have an ambition that we want to be like this by so and so date. And we have heard about these, but I think if it comes out even more clearer, it will make everyone more comfortable, whether it is from a supply chain perspective, investors wanting to invest in supply chains or manufacturers trying to set up things there. So for sure, I think that if something like that comes up, it is welcome.
Okay.
I had
one
a
question,
Kranti, if I may, on this same topic, is that to Mr. Vikram Gulati's point that the government sees this as a $9 trillion per annum revenue opportunity, the automobile space, and EVs today are exempt from a lot of taxes. And I'm wondering that as EVs become a larger percentage of the total mix, what would happen to the price point of EVs themselves as the government scrambles to make up the tax deficit? What would happen there?
So Anupam, if you look at the CNG industry, the parallel, if you look at when the CNG vehicles were introduced, all kinds of exemptions were given, right from registration to all kinds of things. But as the numbers become substantive enough, all the exemptions were removed and they were treated at par with any other internal combustion engine. So I think it's only the scale right now. So right now, because it is just the starting phase, you need that kind of support. Once it becomes mainstream, I don't think these exemptions will continue and they'll be taxed as probably any other vehicle.
And one more point which I wanted to add, Amit, I think last discussion we had on this, similar topic. If you look at the products on the end users, if you look at the for example, the electric two-wheelers or electric cars, which we have seen, a few of the products have outshone others. For example, Nexon EV has done really well. So, and I'm sure all the cars which they've sold are not in those 4 or 5 states which have proper, clearly demarcated EV policy. So I also feel that if you have that kind of product, for example, recently they launched the Tiago EV. Yes.
Tiago.
Sorry, Tigor EV. So that is also kind of, if you bring products in that segment, I think eventually economically also it starts making sense. So customers would make that transition like voluntarily. I mean, they don't have to look at the subsidies. I think the moment we start getting those products in that segment, which are kind of that mass segment, maybe between 7 to 14, 50 lakhs, I think the role of subsidy would kind of diminish. I mean, as a motoring journalist, I feel that as well.
Kranti, I just want to add, I think this is like only a bridging arrangement. And I think build momentum and traction. Once you build that, I think we need to have, government getting all their tax dues with the scale coming up. But by that time, the economy of scale will come for everyone. And
exactly.
Then I think there will be, sufficient.
Because they will start making that, even passive vasool kind of, this calculation, they will start making sense in that scenario also. The moment we have some mass segment products, maybe cheaper than Tigor or Nexon. One question for, I guess, Anupam or Ravneet, is there a requirement of cooperative and, again, Channa Trivedi has asked this, is there a requirement of cooperative and regulatory agency for the development of electric vehicles manufacturers in India? So I guess like SIAM or ACMA, I guess
there is a body, right? So there is SMEV, which is Society for Manufacture of Electric Vehicles, which is a body which is focused purely on the development of the EV ecosystem. It has by way of members, OEMs, component manufacturers, etc. So that body does exist. That tries to consolidate the view of the industry.
Natraj has a question. Until there is a standardized end-to-end ecosystem for with battery size and battery connectors, etc., do you foresee that the swapping being used by a specific segment of the market, for example, transportation? So I guess he means public transportation. I'm not sure, but maybe Mr. Malhotra, you want to take this question? Whether are we going to see the swapping in a specific segment products?
I believe so. I think we are anyway a diverse country, and then we have diverse. We're talking about automobile as a very simple generic term, but there are, I think, starting from two-wheelers to commercial vehicles to three-wheelers. So I think, as Mr. Maini said earlier, we probably need different solutions, and swapping is definitely one of them, but not the only one.
One hardcore question, I guess. This is from Manam Joshi. We are Kosh Energy setting up a state-of-the-art advanced chemistry battery manufacturing setup and also experimenting with some proprietary chemistries technology in our battery packs, basically battery manufacturing. Is this the right time? The question is this the right time to focus on innovation or to put more resources into hardcore supply for standard packs to be required by the EV manufacturers? Anyone?
Ravneet became a richer man and he's going to have a brilliant idea now. Answer to that.
So I think the thing about batteries is actually not battery. It goes all the way back to cell. We're still about, I think, at least 6 to 8 years away from what would eventually become the steady state of cell and therefore batteries. So there is still a lot of development that is happening, a lot of R&D that is still happening. I think there's still headroom for decent innovation in that space in terms of whether it's charge cycles, whether battery cell density, energy density, etc. So I think it's a little early to say, listen, we've reached the what is the steady state solution. Let's start scaling up now. So while scale up obviously is important because you want to support the growth of the industry, but I think the last word on the battery technology has not been said yet. It's still a few years away.
So yeah, scrolling is taking some time. Okay, there will be similar questions, I think, from Chandranath Trivedi. He had asked. Okay, I guess one question which I had, Amit, for you, because at that time I was not in the conversation. You mentioned there is some regulatory or some coordinating body on national level. How is it going to change the scenario? I mean, just a brief. I wanted to understand for viewers who have just joined us. By the time I look for other questions also.
Sure. No, I think and that's what the question is, so who will drive the electric mobility work at a national level? And if you look at this, there are various ministries doing various parts of that entire ecosystem. And so the question is, who will then spearhead? And I think this is where what we need is not a new institution, but maybe create a mission, something like electric mobility mission. And if that mission is created, which brings in all these departments, whether it is the Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Energy, heavy industries, urban development together, and drives the conversation forward, I think it will be difficult otherwise to manage. So electric mobility mission may be a good idea to kind of accelerate the EV deployment in India.
So their observations or regulations, they'll be followed by all the states. I mean, what kind of
so one state, but also within the national government, the various ministries can be much more coordinated. Because right now, if you look at the Ministry of Power is doing their bit, and then the transport is doing their bit, the urban development is doing their bit. There is coordination, but there needs to be a much greater coordination, and that can happen if we have that mission. Like we have seen in some of the other sectors, the mission has really helped and worked.
I know. I mean, that's what we were discussing yesterday also. If you have better coordination among states, also plus more consistent thought process, we can see because we just had, I think 4 to 5 states have clearly demarcated their subsidies for two-wheelers. If all the states have they come with proper guideline, I think it'll be helpful for manufacturers, customers, everyone. One question, Ravneet, I think you would I wanted you to answer. Balachandran has asked, and this is obviously very basic, still one of the most relevant questions. How do you see the cost of batteries going down? And when do you see that? That's the gist of the question. And will it bring the costs of the products down?
Very much, yeah. So battery is by far the most expensive component in the vehicle. But the good news about batteries is that year on year the cell prices are coming down, depending on what your leverage is. Today it's sitting anything between $140 to $145 per kilowatt hour. It's expected to come down to sub 100 in the next 3 to 4 years. This is just on the basis of global trends, not even factoring in the PLI kicking in and local manufacturing kicking in once that happens. So if you're looking at $80, $85 per kilowatt hour, which is what today we believe it will be in about 4 years' time. So we're looking at the price of battery falling by 60, 70%. And the moment that happens, right, at some point we're talking about when subsidies go away, what happens? if you can shave off that, if this price drop in battery is almost similar to today what we have by way of subsidy, right? So if you can absorb that shock of subsidy going away because the cost has come down, suddenly you are parity, right? I think there is a there's a lot of optimism on that side. And this, mind you, this is not even factoring in scale and PLI. This is just organic what's happening today, right? So I think there is a lot of reason to be optimistic about those prices.
Anything more advanced or maybe cheaper version than lithium ion in future? Anything horizon?
I think the upsides and on this one, Kranti. Like I said, this is just organic, right? We haven't factored in PLI. We haven't factored in today's scale. We haven't factored in, another breakthrough in cell chemistry, right? Today, anybody in the business understands that, like I just mentioned, I think there is still some headroom for, some breakthroughs, right? We haven't factored things again. The moment that happens, so this could change the equation really dramatically.
Thank you so much, guys. I guess the time is up. It's 5 o'clock now, and last 2 hours we discussed EVs, ecosystem, challenges, future, everything, and all of you have added so much in this whole discourse, and at least personally, me, I'm more knowledgeable at least after this session. But thank you so much, and I hope the kind of transitions, the kind of breakthroughs we are hoping for, and the kind of the predictions we have for electric vehicles in India, we see it happening very soon. And we maybe in some time we come back together and have a discussion of same sort, but newer and better products. Thank you so much for joining this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you so much.